All right. Ladies and gentlemen of my 2 o'clock 20th century U.S. history class, welcome to a wintry spring day, huh? Boy, it's cold outside. Edition of Klein Time, where, of course, Klein Time is always your time. Indeed. So, some very, very quick reminders. Monday is the last day to withdraw from any 15-week course at WCC. I think the deadline is 3 p.m., but don't quote me on that. If you're going to withdraw from a course, make sure you do it, before then. You don't want to push things, because once you decide to remain in a course after that date, you get a letter grade. In other words, you cannot withdraw at that point. Okay, so please take note. Also, the journal assignment is due March the 30th. I have received several drafts that I've provided feedback on, and also I've invited students to see me after class. Just so I know, did anybody email me a draft and did not get a response from me? Because we did have a little email issue. Okay, good. Is there anybody who will be seeing me after class to go over their draft? Okay, so we'll do a little follow-up. No problem. And also, people who are not here on Tuesday. Ben, you weren't here on Tuesday. Lexi, you weren't here. Fernando, you weren't here. Yeah, see me right after class for 2 seconds. I have to give you guys a document to sign off on. Okay? Anybody else who's not here on Tuesday? Okay. And also, by the way, just another quick reminder, and there was a question that came up in the other class, and I do understand the question, and they're related. There is, yes, you're eligible for an extension for this assignment, for the journal assignment, but there is an extension request deadline. In other words, I don't give last-minute extensions. So please see journal assignment number 1 for the extension deadline. But then the other question that was related, and it's very interesting, I'm guessing that some of you may have had like weird teachers with extensions on this. If I grant you an extension, is your grade penalized because you'll be handing it in late if I grant you an extension? No. No. So your grade is not. So if I grant you a 3-day extension and you submit it within that 72-hour period, that late period, your grade is not penalized. Okay? That's what the purpose of an extension is to make sure you're not penalized for lateness. Does everybody understand that? Okay? But if you submit it after the extension deadline, then you go back to being penalized for lateness. Okay? So if you have any issues or questions, please let me know on that. So when we last left off, we had just finished talking about the issue of bias, right? And we talked about my dad's bias, why he loved Franklin Roosevelt and how that was related to his personal history, why my friend Brian hated Franklin Roosevelt and how that was linked to his personal history. But then we raised the question, what about professional historians? Because after all, technically speaking, right, their job is to detach themselves from their own personal history, right? To be objective in their analysis of the past. And that word, you'll see a lot of that terminology used, objectivity. Come on in. There we go. And the American journalist Walter Lippmann, who was one of the most influential journalists of the 20th century, he's sometimes considered one of the founders of what we call news commentary, along with another journalist named H.L. Mencken, who also had a really good sense of humor, was also very controversial. He said, show me a man who says he's objective, and I'll show you a man who's deceiving himself. In other words, for example, class, baseball season has technically just begun, right, in South Korea, along with a huge gambling scandal with Shohei Ohtani. If I said to you, hey, class, I think the New York Mets are going to have a great season this year, why would you say to me, Dr. Klein, I am not surprised why you would make such a prediction like that, because I'm what, Collins? Yes, I'm a huge Mets fan. Just like if I were to say, hey, class, I think the Yankees are going to have a terrible season. Okay, you'd say, oh, Dr. Klein, of course, you're so biased against the Yankees because you were raised a Mets fan. Okay, that makes sense. Does this mean, by the way, that I can't turn out to be correct, right? The Mets could have a great season and the Yankees could have a terrible season. But I would be lying to you if I told you, well, objectively speaking, the Yankees are going to suck and the Mets are going to be great. Even if I attempt to detach myself from the situation, I realize that I'm a product of my own fishbowl, so to speak. Anybody raised by my father would be thinking that way, right? And that's one of the things Walter Lippmann tries to argue, okay? In that we cannot, careful, Klein, we cannot detach ourselves from our own personal biases, even if, no matter how hard we might try to. In fact, what we sometimes do, by the way, is even when we know we're biased one way, we might go overboard the other way. We might, for example, compensate in some way. Some people have done this. I know this. Like when your parents are divorced and you meet, dad's new friend, and you act extra nice because even though you don't really like her, whatever, you kind of, it's like, oh no, I'm going to be the good trooper, that kind of thing. That's the classic, right? But notice, my bias out of my loyalty towards my mother is manifesting itself, but in a different way, right? So, what I'd like to do is, I want to focus on Daniel Boorstin and Howard Zinn for these reasons. Neither of these very influential historians have ever denied their biases. In fact, not only haven't they denied them, okay, but before they died, they were very transparent about how their own personal histories influenced their historical views. And that's why they're the perfect case studies for us, okay? So even though they'll have very different historical views, the thing that links them is their intimate connection with their own personal history and their acknowledgement of it. You can see the dynamics of it. So, class, just a quick question. This Daniel Boorstin, Howard Zinn, did I ever discuss anything about my personal interactions with either of these guys? Okay, so we're going to be discussing Daniel Boorstin today. First, Howard Zinn, for what it's worth, because I do talk about in the asynchronous lesson. But Daniel Boorstin, I never knew Daniel Boorstin personally. I did know Howard Zinn, but I didn't know Howard Zinn very, very well. Boorstin died in 2004. Howard Zinn died 2010, 2011, around then. He probably would have recognized me. I met him a couple of times. Interestingly enough, Howard Zinn was actually here at WCC in 1992, where he debated one of my colleagues who has since passed away, Professor Benelli, and the title of the topic was Christopher Columbus, Hero or Villain? And this was done in 1992, the 500th anniversary of Columbus's voyages. So, as a person, I also had interaction with him at other events, which you'll be learning a little bit about in the asynchronous lesson. Super nice guy. Super nice guy. You know what was so nice about him? When he was alive, my students used to write to him after I did my lesson on him, and he would write back. You've got to understand, this is kind of what we call a celebrity historian. To give you a sense of that, he wrote an autobiography called "You Can't Remain Neutral While Riding on a Moving Train." And normally, if you write an autobiography, you put out the book, and if you have an audio version of the book, you, the author, usually read the book. Hi, I'm Dr. Klein. My book is entitled Dr. Klein, Story of a Legend. I was born in Yonkers, New York. I'm great. Blah, 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 blah. Well, Howard Zinn had so many admirers, even in Hollywood, because his book, he wrote a lot of books, but his big seller, a book called A People's History of the United States, like you can like find everywhere. Well, one of his celebrity admirers said to him, you know, I've always loved you so much, Professor Zinn, that let me read your do the audio book for you, and I'll do it for free to read your own autobiography. So, can anybody tell me which Hollywood celebrity was it? Yes? I'm not a Hollywood celebrity. Remember that wrong. I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a hint. Ready? He has recently appeared in a Dunkin' Donuts commercial with his best friend Ben Affleck.
I was actually going to guess that anyway. Matt Damon.
Matt Damon is correct. Well done, Claire. Oh, you are en fuego. Part? Yeah. Bingo. So Matt Damon and Howard Zinn like that, right? So, by the way, class, because I think Howard Zinn is a super nice guy, does that mean Dr. Klein necessarily will agree with Professor Zinn's historical points of view? No, right? I know a lot of nice people, some of whom are Yankee fans, who I disagree with vehemently, right? Daniel Boorstin, just so you know for the record, never met the guy, met his granddaughter, okay, Julia, who's a reporter for CNBC, you know, the financial channel that has old episodes of Shark Tank, where Shark Tank people, right? Met Julia at a party, courtesy of my friend Eric, who you will be meeting, by the way, in the Howard Zinn Bias Asynchronous Lesson, which is posted. You can watch it this weekend, and it's nice and juicy. Well, when I'm introduced to her, I go, Julia Boorstin. I said, are you any relation to the historian, the famous American historian Daniel Boorstin, who's been writing U.S. history textbooks on all levels for the last 50 years? And she said, yeah, he was my grandfather. And I was like, oh my God, celebrity blush, you know. I'm like, this is amazing. I said, do you know I actually teach a lesson on him in my class? You know what she said to me? She said to me, sorry, but I hate history, and walked away. Well, worse yet, by the way, she was a history major at Princeton. What a Benedicta Arnold she was. And I learned one thing that night, class. No way Julia Boorstin is going to become the future Mrs. Klein, right? I could do a lot better, right, class?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Collins. I appreciate that. So, that being said, I think in order to understand Daniel Boorstin's historical point of views and the relationship to his biases, we need to analyze his own personal history. So, let's write down some quick facts about Daniel Boorstin as I tie my shoe like Mr. Rogers. And that's our first fact. Yeah. Boorstin. Boorstin. There we go. Okay. So for those of you who ever had the semi-stoned history instructor who said something like this, hey, in my class, I'm just like interested in concepts. Like I don't care about dates. Dates don't really matter. You know, 1492, 1992, whatever. Here's what I say about that instructor. What an idiot. Dates do matter because, as we'll learn in a separate lesson, dates help define context or the circumstances that surround a particular period. That's why in the asynchronous lesson, the artwork flag, to understand that artwork, you have to understand this was an artwork from the 1950s during the Cold War. That is so important. That's critical. So if we do some math here, Daniel Boorstin was born in 1914, which means his kind of formative transitionary years from teenagehood into adulthood, He's going to be 16 in 1930. He's going to be 25 by the end of the decade, 1939. That's going to mean the 1930s is going to be critically important in understanding how he's going to view the world. And to understand that, we have to go back, because we studied the 1930s class. What awful, sad event is happening in the 1930s in the U.S. and throughout the world, class?
The Depression.
That's right, the Great Depression.
Still can call it the Depression.
No, it's the Great Depression, because we've had many depressions. So let's write this down. You can call World War II the war, but the Great Depression. All right. So Brian is here. Gabe is here. Ben just see me right after class. Adriana is not here. Aaron is here. Jackson is here. Joyce, she is here. I'll continue taking attendance in a minute. Now we studied the Great Depression in depth. Remember that graph that I put up with the unemployment graph, and we did a whole analysis of it through the eyes of liberal, conservative, revisionist historians, and we did this long thing. And then when I put up my opinion, what did I think about the graph? I thought about it? Yeah, it doesn't matter. I thought it was irrelevant, right? So I did all that time because I said the key thing about the Great Depression was the psychological effect of Franklin Roosevelt's leadership skills. In other words, that it wasn't really anything about the unemployment rate, but that he was able to successfully reassure the American people that the American democratic system of government was their friend and was behind them, which means, American people, whatever you do, don't overthrow the American system of government. There is still hope. And you may recall, hold that thought, Collins, you may recall that what Roosevelt was really worried about was what happened in another democracy, the democracy in Germany, which was overthrown, and we saw the emergence of a dictatorship, a right-wing dictatorship, under Adolf Hitler. So that was the big fear, and Roosevelt was successful in being able to secure America's loyalty behind our system of government. Not merely him, but the entire system. However, there was a minority of Americans who believed that the American system of democracy, not merely Roosevelt or any other individual, the American system of democracy was incapable of getting America out of the Great Depression in the 1930s. They took the belief that desperate times call for
Desperate measures.
and so as a result, dictatorship was the only way to go. We needed strong, centralized government to get us out of this. Okay? You had those who advocated a right-wing dictatorship. That's why it wasn't a surprise. Remember, we saw the picture of the Nazi rally in 1938 here at the county center. Okay? That is not a surprise. That's happening in the context of the Great Depression. These are people who are saying, look, we need a dictator. Hitler got the Germans out of the Great Depression in their view. We could do the same thing in America. These were your right-wing dictatorship people. And then you had on the other extreme, your left-wing dictatorship people. These are the folks who wanted to have a communist dictatorship in the country. Much like there was only one communist country that existed in the world at the time, which was
The USSR.
the Soviet Union, is correct. Led by who during the 30s? Joseph Stalin, this really ruthless dictator, okay? There were those who said, no, we need a dictatorship, but a communist dictatorship, just like Joseph Stalin has. Yeah, we'll be talking about Joseph Stalin in a minute, okay? Daniel Boorstin was a history student at Harvard University. Daniel Boorstin, along with his college roommate and one of his main history professors, believed that, you know what? American democracy cannot solve the Great Depression. What we need is to overthrow the United States government and install a communist dictatorship. And that is why in 1938, Daniel Boorstin joined the Communist Party of the United States as a Harvard University student. And he did so because he thought that was the only way to get America out of the Great Depression. Let's write this down. And wait a minute, I just had my pen. Wait a minute, I'm not losing my mind. Well, because I've already lost my mind. But, gee, class, where did my pen go? Backup plan. Go to my other pen. Did I put it in here by accident? Yeah. He thought the only way was a dictatorship, a communist dictatorship, representing the workers of the world. Karl Marx, the founder of communism, said, "You have nothing to lose but your chains. Workers of the world, unite." However, class, how many of you have ever made a decision or took an action that you almost, like, as soon as you made it, you almost immediately regretted it and tried to, like, backtrack from it? Anybody make those, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that decisions, right? And you're like, and you try to distance yourself from it, you try to do everything you can. Well, that's what happened to Daniel Boorstin here, because he joins the Communist Party in 1938. And less than a year later, he was like, whoops, whoops, my bad. He leaves the Communist Party in 1939. Okay, I am going to lose my mind. I was just taking attendance with my pen, and I can't find my pen. Ah, there it is.
You went to Harvard, so I assume it wasn't for working class background.
Very interesting. He was not, okay? One of the things that, and Claire's absolutely correct, one of the things that I sort of suggested a little bit when I talked about Roosevelt, and that would continue, is that Ivy League institutions it's not like today where they receive tens of thousands of applications and there's this kind of process. You not only, oftentimes with many colleges, you not only have to have money, but sometimes you have to be connected in some kind of way. That's at this time, and we're going to study this a little bit later on, so I don't want to get ahead of myself too much. But you've got to understand, at this time, less than 4% of all Americans actually attended college. Okay, so this is a very, very small. My grandfather, my grandpa Louis, went to college, and he came from a family of 8 siblings. He was the only one to have gone to college. Okay, and everybody was like, ooh, it's like a museum exhibit. Ooh, interesting. How do you do that? So, hold that thought, Cons, because I am on the fly. Okay. The interesting thing here, in terms of, because people say, well, why did he leave the Communist Party? Daniel Boorstin was not alone. Okay. He leaves the Communist Party, and I'll give a chocolate opportunity so you can't look it up. He leaves the Communist Party for a very specific reason that many communists around the world outside of the Soviet Union are also going to leave their communist parties because of something that happened on August 23rd, 1939, where after that happened, Boorstin and a bunch of communists were like, we're out of here. Justin, what do you got? It is not the collectivization and starvation in the and starvation policies in the Soviet Union. Collins. It is not the joint invasion, but it was the agreement for the joint invasion. It is the Nazi-Soviet Friendship Treaty.
I meant to say the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
That is correct. Otherwise known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or also known as the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. But basically what happened was Joseph Stalin signed a treaty of friendship with the arch enemy of the communists, the Nazis. Yes. Yeah. Do you know? And let me tell you, it gets really, really, really bad. Like, it was more than just like, I won't attack you if you don't attack me. The Soviets became the chief food supplier to the Nazis. Yeah. Oh no, really bad. And the big one, and this is something, little historic awareness stuff. One of the reasons why Stalin signs it with Hitler was Hitler offers him a seemingly really good deal, because even though you might think, oh, the communists hated the Nazis, Stalin couldn't stand the Nazis, all this kind of stuff. One of the things, and I'll get to that in a second too, because here's where it gets like really weird. But you ever hear the expression, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union shared a common enemy, which was the country that stood in between the Soviet Union and Germany, as Collins had said, Poland. So Hitler offers Stalin this deal, says, I'm going to invade Poland pretty shortly, otherwise known as next week, okay? I'm going to invade Poland. You guys, the Soviets, you can get the eastern third of Poland for basically like doing nothing, okay? Yeah, essentially for free. So here's what happens. September 1st, 1939, Hitler and the Nazis invade Poland, okay? What many people don't know, and certainly many students don't know, is that 2 weeks later, the Soviets invade Poland from the other side, from the east, okay? And they're able to secure basically that third of Poland without actually really having to fire anything more than a shot or two. That is why, class, and this is why these things matter and why history matters on two accounts. One, if you go to Poland, or if you know people of Polish ancestry, one of the things, generally speaking, is although they don't like the Germans for World War II, they really hate the Russians for World War II, because the Russian, for them, as one, I was in Krakow, Poland, okay, in 2015, and I was speaking to some Poles, and they said, at least the Nazis were manned up by invading us straight on. In other words, meaning that they attacked us straight on. It wasn't like the Russians who stabbed us in the back. Okay, so as a result, that animosity still exists today. That is why it is not an accident in the current war between Russia and Ukraine that the Polish government, has acted as one of the chief suppliers to the Ukrainians. One of the reasons. There are many, but that's one of them. So that's why you have to be kind of very, very careful on these issues, okay? That being said, class, let me follow up with you on this question. Remember I asked you about that decision that you made, or that where you're like, oh my God, the what was I thinking decision? How many of you, even though you try to backtrack from that decision almost as soon as you made it, how many of you are somehow still haunted by that decision, or that decision somehow is still used against you? Okay, right? Well, question. Even though Daniel Boorstin, looking ahead, even though Daniel Boorstin turn off all phones. You must do that. Klein hates interruptions like that. Turn it off. Turn it off. Even though Daniel Boorstin was in the Communist Party for only a very short period of time, what do you think he might be worried about moving forward? Yes, Justin. Pardon? Well, just since we don't know what that is, Just tell me, what do you think he might be worried about? Just what? Yeah. He's going to be worried. Remember, if you join the Communist Party of the United States, you want to overthrow the government of the United States. That's the dreaded T word, class, treason. Okay? And so one of the things that's going to be operating in his mind is being branded a traitor for a decision, that he made when he was much younger. So just put that in the back of your mind for now. We're going to get to that. So he leaves the communists in 1939. Hitler signs that friendship treaty with Joseph Stalin, and Hitler will invade Poland on September 1st, 1939. September 3rd, Great Britain and France will declare war on Nazi Germany. Then, in the middle of September, the Soviet Union will invade Poland from the other end. And then basically everything kind of ended, right? I mean, Hitler and Stalin remained pals for the rest of their lives, right? BFFs forever, class? Question. Raise your hand for this one. It's going to be one or the other. Class poll. Here we go. The friendship would not last, class. I'm going to ask the whole class this, okay? Thank you, eager beavers. Who backstabbed who? Hitler backstabbed Stalin or Stalin backstabbed Hitler? How many people say Hitler backstabbed Stalin? Stalin backstabbed Hitler. Hitler backstabbed Stalin. In June of 1941, less than 2 years later, the Nazis invade the Soviet Union, and class, they murder 50 million Russians. 50 million. Okay? Now, as a side note, okay, and I'm going to try to put this as a personal development lesson for all of you. One of the interesting things about the invasion of the Soviet Union, and there's been a lot of research done on this, this is kind of in Dr. Klein's wheelhouse, is there's a consensus of historians who now argue one of the issues with Joseph Stalin as a dictator was his high level of paranoia, okay? In other words, he feared members of his own family. He had members of his own family killed and sent off to Siberia, okay? This is a guy who was very, very, very paranoid, okay? And when the Nazis invaded on June 22nd, 1941, and Stalin is told of this, he thought his military commanders were lying to him. And we have several reports. In fact, I have a friend of mine named Pavel Litvinov, whose grandfather was the Soviet foreign minister before Ribbentrop, Maxim Litvinov. And he told me that Stalin had told his commanders there's no way Hitler could have ever be attacking us. And they're like, no, he isn't. No way. And they're like, why not? He said, because Adolf Hitler was the only man I ever trusted. Kid you not. Let that be a very important lifelong lesson, class. Choose your friends carefully. A lot can be at stake here. Justin, question? After? No. That was That was the division over Czechoslovakia in 1938. That was the Munich Pact. Different. Okay? So, but now we go back to the issue of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, because 6 months after Hitler attacks the Soviet Union, Hitler's ally, Imperial Japan, attacks Pearl Harbor. And Hitler and the Nazis, to the happy surprise of Franklin Roosevelt, out of the blue 3 days later, says, we're declaring war against the United States. So now, the Soviet Union and the United States now have a common enemy, Nazi Germany. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, even though the United States and the Soviet Union before World War II, before 1939, were anything but friends. Franklin Roosevelt, it's funny, until 1933, the United States, to understand how much the United States disliked the Soviet Union, the United States first in 1920 tried to overthrow the Soviet government, okay? Then, after we failed to do that, we did not even recognize the existence of the Soviet government, okay? That's that person you know who you walk by in school that you hated so much that you didn't even acknowledge them as you walk by. It wasn't, you didn't even make a mean face at them. It was as if they weren't there, you know, kind of like the way I see Ben, okay? You know, you don't acknowledge their existence, right? Only Franklin Roosevelt had decided to end that just because he saw the rising threat of Hitler and saying, you know, I know we're not friends with the Russians at all. We hate them, but this Hitler guy is a super threat. Maybe we can do something to start at least talking to them on the side, you know. So he recognizes at least the existence of the Soviet Union, but he says, but don't get me wrong, we still hate them. We're just acknowledging that they exist. Well, now this completely changes because now we have an enemy of my enemy is my friend situation, and now the United States and the Soviet Union, in Dr. Klein's humble opinion, will form the most powerful military alliance in all of human history and crush Nazi Germany in World War II. And in certain ways, it was a perfect partnership, along with the junior partner, but very important partner, Great Britain, who kind of served as a good, like, theater or base for a lot of operations. America's industrial might, combined with the very large Soviet population, we can arm the Soviet army to fight Nazi Germany. And to give you a sense, by the way, and it's something that when people often think about World War II, just a quick World War II note for people so that you can really be able to have some historical awareness on this. Normally, when people think of World War II, they think of like movies like Saving Private Ryan, events like D-Day, right? Hold that thought, Collins. You got to chill a little bit. Saving Private Ryan, right? What people lose sight of is when we talk about the military history of World War II in Europe, we're specifically after June of 1941, we are predominantly, overwhelmingly, 95% talking about the real game changer is what's happening in Eastern Europe and the fight between the Nazis and the Soviet army. That's where everything is really happening, okay? That's where the turning points are. And you can even see it in terms of the loss of life. The Soviets are going to lose about 50 million citizens in total, roughly 20 million Soviet military personnel, 20 million. The United States is going to lose about 400,000 to 500,000 soldiers in World War II. The Soviets lost 400,000 soldiers in the first week of the Battle of Kursk in July of 1943. One battle. This is not to demean the sacrifices that my father's generation and my father were willing to undertake, but it's not on the scale. Okay? So, but the alliance was so strong because we were able to supply the Soviet Union and use Great Britain also as a base to help facilitate that supply, okay, in order to create this winning effort. Yes, Collins, question. That is correct. We needed Great Britain for its strategic location, and that's going to be important also for establishing the post-war world, because the United States will use Great Britain as the jump-off point to go on to the continent through France, and then the U.S. Army and the Soviet Army would literally crush Germany like a grape right in the middle, and Germany would be divided for many years as a result. Okay, so the war ends. Soviet Union and the United States emerge as the two global superpowers. And we see the emergence of a new war, the class, the Cold War, which you learned a little bit about when I discussed the artwork flag in the asynchronous lesson. But just as a reminder, this is going to usher in about a half-century level of hostility between the United States and the Soviet Union. But let me just quickly redefine for you Cold War so you understand what we're talking about, because Cold War is a generic term, okay? And it simply means a heightened state of hostility or tension between two or more parties without what? Without, and I'm going to be very precise, direct armed conflict. Okay? So watch, class. I'll test you out so you know if you know what a Cold War means. Ready? Let's say Ben and I are in a Cold War, okay? Can I punch Ben in the face if we're in a Cold War? No, because that's direct armed conflict. Question. Can I have my friend Collins punch Ben in the face? Yes. Can I have my friend Collins punch Ben's friend Jackson in the face? Yes. Those are examples of what we call proxy wars. Okay? Here's one. Class, can I point a gun at Ben's face? Yes, I can. As long as I don't do what? Fire it. In other words, I could point a gun in his face in order to intimidate him. Both the United States and the Soviet Union are going to try to do that through the buildup of their atomic and nuclear weapons arsenals as a method of intimidation. How about this? Can I spread nasty rumors about Ben, like he bites his toenails every Tuesday night? Oh, I'm sorry, Ben. Can I do that? In a Cold War? Sure. When governments do that, what is that called? It begins with the letter P. Propaganda. Great. Excellent. Oh, this class is excellent. Oh, can I try to get Ben's friend Jackson to spy on Ben for me? And maybe give some of Ben's intimate secrets to me that I could use against him? And maybe some of Ben's great technology? Sure. Steal his computer hard drive? Absolutely. That's also something very special. Begins with letter E. What's that an example of? Espionage is correct. Boy, Cold Wars can be kind of fun. You probably thought that Cold Wars can be boring because you can't punch him in the face, but Cold Wars can really work out, which means, by the way, can you win a Cold War? Oh, sure. Sure. It just means there's the tactic of direct armed conflict cannot be used. But there could be a lot of other tactics that you can use to win a Cold War. Okay? That being said, one of the tactics that was used by the Soviet Union, and may I add, by the United States, was indeed espionage. Like, for example, anybody here Bronx roots? Anybody know the Bronx really well? No? Do you know where Albert Einstein Medical Center is in the Bronx? Right? Near Pelham Parkway, like in the Morris Park section? Okay. So, there used to be this couple back in the 1940s, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They lived in the Morris Park section of the Bronx. And Julius and Ethel Rosenberg got into a little bit of trouble. You know what trouble they got into, class? Yeah, they did a big no-no. Class, they gave the secrets of the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. Julius was an atomic scientist that worked in the Manhattan Project out in New Mexico. Remember the pictures of me in New Mexico? And yeah, and by the way, you know what happened to Julius and Ethel as a result of that, class? Yeah, they got the death penalty, the electric chair. You know where they were electrocuted, class? Sing Sing, right here in Westchester, in Ossining, ordered by Judge Leonard Kaufman. That is correct. Now, I'm going to tell you more about the Rosenbergs in a later lesson because, believe it or not, as you're going to find out, Dr. Klein had some connection to them, as we'll find out, okay? Just by happenstances, we'll figure out. But when the Rosenberg case and other cases of espionage emerged right after World War II, this is going to trigger a Red Scare in the country, meaning the question that maybe there are American spies in all walks of life living amongst us. And so the United States government formed a special congressional committee called the House on Un-American Activities Committee. I'm going to have you write down some notes in a minute, nicknamed HUAC. In fact, its vice chairman was a new congressman who was elected in 1946 from Yorba Linda, California, who had a semi-obscene nickname, who later became President of the United States. You know who that was for Reese's? Yeah, the vice chair of the House on Un-American Activities Committee in 1946. Later became President of the United States. Yes, it was. Well done. Richard, nickname?
Nixon.
Tricky Dick Nixon. Because, I know. It's like a 6th grade moment. Because he was the guy that Nixon was, you know how Lyndon Johnson was the guy that he had a tough time agreeing with because he was so dislikable? Nixon was sort of a little different. It wasn't that he was so much dislikable as you said, oh, I agree with Richard Nixon on this. That's a good idea, but I don't trust the guy. That was the problem with Nixon. It's like, you didn't trust Nixon, okay? So with that said, one of the big fears was that there were communist spies still in the United States, some of whom had had a communist history in the 1930s, others that hadn't but were suspected. And one of the things that the government of the United States was very concerned about was what was being taught in schools. Daniel Boorstin who is basically this young, rising historian who was starting to write U.S. history textbooks, was brought in to the House on Un-American Activities Committee in 1953 to testify. And specifically, he's going to be asked how he opposes communism. Remember, he had been a communist, but then left very quickly after that. Okay, Josh Hernandez is not here. Justin is here. Amelia is here. Claire, of course, is here. Okay, Alexa's here. You're just going to see me after class. No problem. Steve is here. Gab is here. Dave is here. Lillian Quinn is not here. Fernanda is here. Fernanda, just see me after class for 2 seconds. Jose Sanchez is here. Maria is here. Jacob Valentin is not here. Collins is here. Merlinda is here. And Frank is here. So you know, and this was, by the way, not unusual. The HUAC committee, and then later on there will be a Senate investigative committee led by a senator from Wisconsin named Joseph McCarthy. But understand, he arrives late to the game. People have already said McCarthy is McCarthy. The Congress was doing this well before Joe McCarthy, okay? And just so you also know something else too, this was a bipartisan thing, meaning both Democrats and Republicans did it. So like Harry Truman, who's the president, was a Democrat. Well, he instituted loyalty oaths for all federal and state government employees, such that when my mom became a teacher, she had to raise her right hand and say that she has never been nor ever will become a member of the Communist Party of the United States. And she took that oath in 1958. Yeah. So bear that in mind. This was a real issue, right? So the first thing that Professor Boorstin was asked is something that anybody who had been a communist was asked by the committee. And that was, Professor Boorstin, we know you were a communist for a very brief period. We all make mistakes, papa, you were young and dumb. Can you just tell us all of the names of all of the communists that you know, especially those who are currently teaching at our educational institutions? So here's my question for you guys. Do you think Boorstin names names and rats out his old friends, like his old college roommate and all that, or he keeps his mouth shut? How many people think he names names, rats out his friends, keeps his mouth shut? Oh, he sings like a canary, class. He names names. Oh, yeah. Now, if you are a critic of Daniel Boorstin, what is going to be your reasoning as to why he's naming all these names? Why is he doing it? Collins.
To get out from
Exactly. To avoid the taint of treason, because what do you think happens to all of the people that he names? What happens to them, Collins? They are not executed. Yeah. But they are professionally executed. What does that mean? Yeah, it means you lose your job and you get what's called blacklisted. It means you're not going to be hired as a history professor anywhere anymore for basically, for many of them, the rest of their lives. Okay? Certainly, for at least, as we'll see from this period, at least another 10 to 15 years. Okay? So, he is going to name names. Okay? And for critics of Borston, they're going to say, he did it to save his butt, okay? For supporters of Borston, they're going to say, hey, he's trying to do the right thing. Now, just as a quick aside, I'll give you a little funny story on this. I don't know if I mentioned the asynchronous lesson. Howard Zinn hated Daniel Borston. And the rumor was that when Borston died in 2004, Zinn said, oh, I'm glad he died because now I can spit on his grave. Okay? Which illustrates, by the way, something very important. We often think of like history, this academic subject. There are a lot of emotional things at stake here, right? This is serious stuff. So, but Borston's going to go further. He's going to reveal his bias to us by, in his same testimony, and here's his quotes, he's going to tell us his purpose in his writings. Okay? Let's write down what he says. He says this. My opposition, when he asks, how do you oppose communism? My opposition, he says, has taken two forms. First, I'm going to give you all the names of all the communists that I know. Check. Okay? But then he's going to go further. Look at what he says. He says, the second form of my opposition to communism has been an attempt to discover and explain to students in my teaching and in my writing the unique virtues or qualities of American democracy. All right. Wow. So here's what I want you to do. After you write all of this, I want you to write down one of three answer choices. Ready? It's either going to be plus sign for positive, minus sign for negative, or one of these, somewhere in between. SIB. Somewhere in between. Okay? And the question is this. If you were to read, based on what Borston says is his purpose, okay? If you were to read a typical Daniel Borston U.S. history textbook, like, for example, I have an excerpt here from a U.S. history textbook he wrote for middle school students. Remember those awkward years in middle school? Middle school textbook from 1962. Do you think Daniel Borston would tend to write very positive views of America's past, negative views of America's past, or somewhere in between? Write down which one do you think it would be. Plus, minus, or somewhere in between. Based on all of this. Hope I'm giving you enough notes. Claire, is there a complaint? No. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, Collins is complaining there's not enough notes in Klein's class. I will see what I could do. Fernanda is agreeing with Collins. No, Fernanda's taking out a machete right now. Okay, no problem. Okay, how many of you put, almost all set? How many put positive? He's going to write positive views of America's past. How many wrote negative views? Somewhere in between, Gang, glorious, overwhelmingly positive views. I mean, we're talking honey dripping positive. Okay? Yeah. Let me give you a sense of this, and then I'll pass one out to everybody in the class. Something I realized I did not pass out to my other class. This is from his prologue, okay? The prologue is kind of an introduction to the introduction, okay? For his middle school U.S. history textbook that he wrote in 1962. And understand, this guy is going to write so many U.S. history textbooks that if you go back to your old high school and you go into the social studies closet or look at the bookshelves, I guarantee you, I will bet you $10,000 and give you 10 to 1 odds straight up that you will see a Daniel Boorstin book. It is impossible to avoid them. They are always there. Okay? Yes? Daniel, no U.S. historian has dominated the U.S. history textbook market more than Daniel Boorstin. Boorstin is kind of like on that Mount Rushmore. Another person you probably saw was John Garrity, Alan Brinkley. I mean, that's kind of like, his family is still making royalties off his textbooks. The guy has been dead for 20 years. Hello. Okay, right? So, here's what I want to do. We're going to play a game, and then I'll take Collins's question. We're going to play a game. It's called, Did He Really Write That? Okay, so people who are Klein time veterans are not eligible to participate. Everybody else is, okay, for a chocolate. Did he really write that? So, where I'm going to read you some excerpts, and you tell me which excerpt strikes you as, whoa, we need to take a time out and discuss this one, Dr. Klein. So here we go. Ready? Listen how positive these views are. Ready? From A History of the United States, 1962, prologue by Daniel Boorstin. American history is the story of a magical transformation. How did people from everywhere join the American family? How did men and women from a tired old world where people thought they knew what to expect become wide-eyed explorers of the new world? What does it mean? What does it mean to be an American? No commentary, thank you. What does it mean to be an American? To answer that question, we must shake hands with our earlier selves and become acquainted. What has been especially American about our ways of living and earning a living? Our ways of making war and making peace? What has been especially American about our ways of thinking and hoping, of fearing, of worshiping God, and of fighting the devil? What has been especially American about our ways of traveling, practicing politics, importing people, building houses and cities? These are just some of the questions we try to answer in this book, because discovering America is a way of discovering ourselves. This is a book about us. Okay, non-Klein time veterans, I have a Reese's ready. Did he really write that? Oh boy. Fernando, what do you got? No. What excerpt? You have to identify the excerpt. The first, American history is the story of a magical transformation. How did everyone get to join the American family? No, I'm so sorry, but thank you for playing. Collins?
The first one where the one where they have to give up their old selves.
Nope, so sorry. Well done, Claire. It's this part. It says, what has been especially American about our ways of traveling, practicing politics, and of importing people? What is that a reference to? It's a reference to slavery. Now, understand, class, did slavery, if we're technically speaking, did slavery involve the importation of people? Absolutely, okay? But does it convey the scope and horrors of the institution of slavery, be it the slave trade or the actual practice of enslavement? No, think about it. You're at a party, okay, and there's a slave trader at the party. You don't even know what the guy does for a living. You go up to him and say, hey, I'm a student at WCC. How about yourself? And he says, I'm in the import business. You don't sit there and say, oh, that's great. You know, I bet you get to travel the world. You don't sit there saying, he's a slave trader. And this is something very important. What Daniel Boorstin is going to do is he doesn't lie. People understand that he doesn't lie in his U.S. history textbooks. What he does is he emphasizes and accentuates the positive and de-emphasizes and often sanitizes the negative, okay? Otherwise known as sugarcoating, okay, to make it more palatable. As a result, what emerges are very, very, very patriotic storylines and narratives of the American past. What we have to figure out is, what we have to do is connect the bias here. And take one, pass one around. Take one, pass one around. Yeah. Kind of had a student in the other class said, this kind of has a Brady Bunch feel to it. Extras, who needs extras? Can we pass? Oh, no. Yeah, it looks like there's enough. Oh, hold on. Need more? Yeah, but this side doesn't. There we go. Okay. So think about this, class. Okay. What's kind of happening here in this dynamic? Okay. For Boorstin, what he is doing is he's practicing compensation. We have a quote of the day for you. I don't know if you've written it down, but here we go. Have you written this one down, class? I don't think, yes you have? No, you haven't. Quote of the day, either we run towards our past or away from it. Either we run towards our past, and that's a quote from me, either we run towards our past or away from it. So what is Daniel Boorstin doing? Running towards his past or away from it? Is he embracing his past or running away from it? He's running away from his past by trying to compensate for his past. He's running away from his past in order to compensate for his past. And gang, we sometimes know people like this. Like, how many of you, either yourselves or you know somebody who has very, very strict parents? Anybody know what the super strict parents, right? Now, but for those who know the strict parents, how do you know that those same strict parents that, like, don't let you go out and party with your friends on Saturday night, when they were your age, they were super partiers and reckless folks, okay? Now, watch. I don't know any of your family members, right? Are you one of those people? Yeah? Okay, watch. Ready? Here we go. So, Merlinda, right? I bet that when you've said something like, I don't understand, why can't I go out and have a good time? After all, you did that when you were my age. Somebody said something like this to you. Oh, precious child, we just don't want you to make the same mistakes we did when we were your age. We're trying to protect you. Something like that. Some garbage like that, correct? Okay. So let me tell you what the psychological dynamic is on that, okay? They can't turn back time. They can't go back to when they were your age, okay? But the only way to make up for their misdeeds, in their view, is to make sure everybody they care about doesn't make the same mistake they did. That's what Daniel Boorstin's trying to do. Daniel Boorstin's saying, look, I really screwed up by becoming a traitor in the late 1930s. I was young and dumb. I want to make sure that nobody else makes the same mistakes I did. And so, in doing so, he's going to be recognized for writing these patriotic histories and acknowledged by the U.S. government. And that is why Daniel Boorstin in 1975 is going to get the highest ranking position that you can get as a historian in the U.S. government. He's going to become the head of the Library of Congress. So it's interesting. The man who, as a young man, wanted to overthrow American democracy now is singing to its unique virtues and qualities. Okay? And needless to say, he still, even though he's been dead for 20 years, is still in the world, in the history world, still a very controversial figure. You know, was he the bad guy who turned his life around to do good? Or was he the guy who just wanted to save his own behind? And oftentimes your view of him is dependent on your own, oftentimes your own historical views, right? But one of the things that there's no doubt about is his bias. That his bias has been towards writing patriotic histories because he reveals that that's what his purpose is, rooted in his long-term personal history. Okay, last 5 minutes, best 5 minutes. 1 second. It's okay, we're fine. So, you're going to watch the bias lesson, Howard Zinn. Okay, take full notes. I want to introduce you to the 5th reason why I gave you the Robin Hood assignment. Okay? And in doing that, I want to introduce you to one of my favorite hobbies. History, of course, not only is my hobby that became my profession, my second favorite hobby, which I spoke about on the first day of class, poker. Do I have any poker players in the class? Okay. So check this out, Justin. I actually played in the 2019 World Series of Poker in an event that had a tournament that had about 28,000 players. Want to see a picture of me playing in the tournament? Yeah. Oh, by the way, Justin, since you're a player, do you think I'm a good poker player? Yeah, good. Excellent. Excellent. Justin, can you tell the class, knowing poker, why wouldn't what do you think would be Dr. Klein's greatest weakness playing poker? Yes, yes. How many of you know the Lady Gaga song Poker Face? Okay. If somebody says they're very poker faced, what is the definition of that? What does that mean if they're poker faced? They don't do what? They don't give their emotions away, right? So, how many of you consider yourselves very poker faced? Like, Dr. Klein would never know what's going on in my life because I always look like everything is fine or something like that. How many of you are the exact opposite, like Dr. Klein? You wear your emotions on your sleeve. You know exactly how somebody feels right away. So you're absolutely right. This is actually me in the 2019 Big 50 tournament, World Series of Poker 2019. Boom, there I am. Bam. Okay, that's me. Okay. And so this happened in Las Vegas, Nevada, okay, at the Rio Hotel, 28,000 players, okay, cost $500 to enter, right? And in order to win any money in this poker tournament, you had to actually finish in the top 10%. That means about 25,000 players need to be eliminated before you can even make like $100, okay? So every player got 50,000 chips, not $50,000, 50,000 chips to start out. And guess what? Your professor, Dr. Klein, got off to a really good start, got off to a really good run. In fact, they had like the Poker News was like covering the event because it's such a big event. And so like I actually even made like the news, like on day 2 of the event, it was a multi-day event because there were so many players, right? Klein hits set on the flop. For those of you who don't know anything about poker, that's just a really, really good hand. And by that time, I had quintupled the initial number of chips I was given. I went from 50,000 to almost 270,000. And then I won this big pot against this guy. Ended up with $500,000 in chips. Nice. And gang, by the start of the 3rd day of the tournament, out of 28,000 players, your professor, Dr. Klein, was in 6th place in the entire tournament with 4.8 million in chips. In fact, a lot of these folks are, in fact, Adrian Curry, great player. Okay, he's a professional. Okay, I ended up meeting him later. Josh Suat was at my table. Josh is a poker pro, right? I was even taking chips off him. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, I was winning. And what ended up happening was you need to finish in 2,800th place in order to make money. I didn't finish in 2,800 or 2,700 or 2,600 or 1,900. Gang, I finished in 100. And with my prize money, Dr. Klein bought himself a 2019 Honda Civic. Yeah. Now, hold that thought because we're pressed for time. Here's the interesting thing, okay? Last 2 minutes, best 2 minutes. I was waiting online after I got eliminated from the poker tournament in 100th place. And by that time, most of the players were just like these fantastic professional players, amazing players. And they looked at me and they're like, hey, we haven't seen you here on the poker circuit. And it's like, well, I'm a professor of history at Westchester Community College. And they're like, oh, it's like, well, you played a really good game. And I'm like, and I said, well, thank you. I said, but what was so good about it? They said to me, we couldn't read you. You had a great poker face. And I'm sitting there like, really? And then it's like, if you take a look here, like, I remember when this photo was taken of me. This was a huge hand that I won. So I want you to look at me and tell me you can win poker hands in one of two ways. Either your hand is really, really good and you just win the pot in what we call a showdown, or you can convince your opponent that your hand is really good even if it isn't, and then he folds his hand so you win the pot. It's called bluffing. How many of you thought, looking at my face, that I had a really good hand and I won the pot? Good. How many think, I bet you were bluffing and your opponent folded? Good. Ladies and gentlemen, I had the second strongest starting hand in poker, a pair of kings in these two cards here. But my opponent thought I was weak, that I was bluffing, and he bet his entire number of chips against me, and I won all of them. Okay? But this is going to raise an important question for us. I just told Justin at the beginning of this little mini lesson that my big weakness in poker is that I don't have a poker face. Yet now I have a poker face here, and I'm able to survive 27,900 players in a poker tournament, and I'm beating poker professionals. How do we explain that? We will have to figure out that reason when we come back on Tuesday. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.